in a minute. And
and Mike, mine's not going to work, so if we can go with yours, please.
Okay, I might just ask people if you can put yourselves on mute, because we will have quite a number of people joining us today. The session will also be recorded, so just bear that in mind. We make all of our seminars freely available on our website once they're recorded. So
do you see my
yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much.
we can. So I think thanks, Kate. It's great that we've got that sorted. So yes, I'll just briefly introduce the seminar series. So these seminars are organised within the New South Wales Health Statewide Biobank, which is based in Camperdown, Sydney. We're very pleased, to provide these seminars to the community and to record them. I just want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the ancestral lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to Indigenous people present today, and
I'm running around.
Also elders past, present and emerging. So I'm going to now.
We've lost you, Jenny. That's you've muted you. I guess you've just muted yourself.
Goodness me, I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to do that. Right, sorry about muting myself in my instructions to mute for people to mute themselves. I didn't intend to mute my own self who was speaking. We are very pleased to welcome two speakers today. So with us we have Dr. Kate Christian. Kate is a visiting fellow at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, and she's also the Create Training Coordinator at the NHMRC Centre of Research Excellence in Pulmonary Fibrosis. And I think, Kate, is that located in Sydney?
Yeah, it is at Sydney University.
Yeah, I thought it was. And we also have Associate Professor Michael Doran, who's Director of Cellular Therapies within Biologics Engineering Department of AstraZeneca. And he's joining us from Maryland in the US, and he's also a visiting fellow at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane. So Mike's joining us at 9 p.m. at night, so we're obviously very grateful for him for joining us at that time. But I think, Kate, you're going to start, and our two speakers are going to be talking about their research that they've been conducting, I think, over a number of years around the experiences of early career researchers within the Australian STEM environment. And their work has been published in a number of fora and has received a lot of international recognition, primarily through the journal Nature. So we are very fortunate to hear them both present their research into the Australian STEM ECR research environment, challenges and solutions. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you, Jenny, very much. And starting right at this first slide, well, firstly, thank you very much for this opportunity for us to present our research. And apologies to Mike and Joanne Larkins, whose names are not on this first slide, and of course they should be, which is very bad behaviour on my part. Next slide, please, Mike. So first, just a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me. My career's been in medical research, mostly in cancer research, and I've managed both research projects and researchers. But in all my jobs, I've worked very closely with young researchers. The other image is a picture of my textbook, Keys to Running Successful Research Projects, All the Things They Never Teach You, which I wrote for early career researchers. And given the audience today, I'll just mention that I once knew a little bit about biobanking when I held the position of Biobank Manager for Cancer Council New South Wales. And there are thousands of bloods collected under my watch, which are now in the care of the New South Wales Biobank. And I have no conflicts to mention today. Next slide, please, Mac. So we're going to present you some of the results from our project, Challenges Faced by Early Career Researchers in the Sciences in Australia. And this was a 2022 follow-up to another project for which we collected data in 2019. In both cases, they were mixed methods projects using a framework of job satisfaction. And our target population was early career researchers, which are referred to as ECRs, up to 10 years postdoctoral, working in universities and independent research institutes in Australia. Next slide, please. Thank you. In each project, we have run a national survey and conducted a series of semi-structured in-depth interviews with women researchers. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to report some of the results of the 2022 survey, and then Mike will continue with his big picture view and some ideas about what to do about it. So we see on this slide that the big picture is grim, and it's actually pretty confusing. So as you can see there, 56% of people agree their job is a source of considerable personal strain, and 71% agree it's a poor time to start on this career. But at the same time, they say that if they had to do it over again, they wouldn't. Sorry, only 33%, 35% agree if they had to do it again, they wouldn't become. They'd still go ahead and become an academic. So they're conflicted. The job's stressful, they don't recommend it to others, but they'd still do it again if they were going to have another go. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. Next slide, please, Mike. We identified a range of unpleasant workplace characteristics, and Mike, this is a click for each one. Job insecurity, unpleasant workplace culture, poor supervision, lack of work-life balance, they're overworked, they're stressed and have mental health issues, they suffer from bullying and harassment, questionable research practices, and inequity. And unfortunately, the undesirable workplace culture that we identified in 2019 has become less desirable since the pandemic. And the overall job satisfaction, which is already significantly lower than the Australian workforce national average, which happens to be 80% people satisfied, has decreased from 62% down to 57%, so miles below the average person. And as you can see on this table here, things are much worse since COVID. But I'll go through these items one by one. So over to the next one, please, Mike. So a huge 71% of people report they've been impacted by lack of support from their institutional supervisors, and this is down from 60 or up from 60%. And I suspect that this is a reflection of the fact that ECRs are actually not generally speaking worried about. It appears there's a view that they're not worth investing time in because most of them won't be around for long, and the ones that are going to survive will essentially look after themselves. In fairness, the supervisors are too busy, and their supervision load is really not properly factored into their workload. And then there's the limited expectation that they will supervise. Apart from that, of course, the poor old supervisors are usually fighting for their own survival. Next page, please. 48% of survey respondents are stressed or very stressed on a daily basis. And many of them are considering, sorry, Siri's suddenly talking to me. Many of them are considering leaving because of depression, anxiety, or other mental health concerns related to their work. These were new questions in 2022, so we don't actually have a direct comparison with 2019. But we do know that in 2019, 80% of the respondents had considered leaving academia, and there's no reason to suggest this number would have reduced. On to the next one, please, Mike. Workload has increased. It's so 61% now compared with 49% in 2019. As we know, a lot of people in academia lost their jobs during the pandemic, and this figure probably reflects the need of the institutions to now get more done with fewer people. So we hear a lot of people are being told, if you want to stay, then you have to do this too. Next page, next slide. Moving on to the questionable research practices, we were really shocked in 2019 when we learned that 38% of people had been impacted by QRPs, but now it's increased. And this worrying 47% of people impacted themselves or in their career advancement from questionable research practices from within their institution. This time around, we looked into the QRPs in more depth to see what they were meaning by these claims, but we didn't give them that opportunity last time around. And there was a wide range of them reported. The most prevalent is unethical pressure due to authorship, regarding authorship, but there was also inappropriate presentation of results, analysis of data, and project design. 13% of our respondents believe the QRPs that they've observed would lead to paper retractions or other serious consequences, such as cancellation of funding, if they were known about it. And these ECRs gave us detail about problems that they thought were worthy of investigating, but few, only 22%, thought their institution would actually act on a complaint. Next slide, please, Mike. Continuing with these bad workplace behaviours, 46% of them reported they'd been impacted by harassment based on power position, and this is up from 35%. And asked a different way in another question, we got the same number who said they'd personally experienced bullying. And it's of great concern that the supervisor or another senior colleague is almost always the perpetrator. And I'm going to read you a horrible comment, but typical of many. Bullying has been a horrendous and unexpected part of academia for me. It's impacted me in the last 5 years and destroyed people around me. The institution in the end supported the bully, who was superior in hierarchy and was receiving all sorts of high distinctions, including some of the highest, Tall Poppy of the Year. So it was probably seen as a better investment than junior staff. Now, probably related to this harassment, when asked if they feel safe in the work environment, it's very concerning that 13% of our respondents feel unsafe, and this number was consistent 2022 and 2019. Next slide, please, Mike. So on to inequitable hiring practices. So 49% of our respondents felt they'd been impacted by inequitable hiring practices, and this is up from 40% previously, and 13% of them report it as a significant problem. A major concern is that this is now affecting more than half of the women. So 54% of them thought it was a big problem, although 41%, which is the figure for men, is still a matter of grave concern. Next slide, please. We tested the levels of job satisfaction between the different cohorts. So we looked at type of position, years postdoctoral, age, whether or not English was the first language, and gender. And we actually found there was little difference between most of the groupings. However, those who were 5 to 10 years postdoc were more likely than the younger ones to report that their overall workload was too high. And they also had a higher impact, I thought this is surprising, a higher impact of harassment based on power position, and more of them had experienced bullying. I suppose that's not a surprise because they'd had more time to be bullied. The older ones also reported a lower level of job satisfaction. Next slide. In most cases, the differences between genders in 2022 were not significant, but there were differences, statistical significant differences for feeling stressed and for inequitable hiring practices. Interestingly, the men were more stressed, but the women more frequently reported the inequitable hiring practices. And the incidence of bullying was particularly concerning for women. 52% of them have experienced bullying, compared with 39% of men. And in response to a slightly different question, the percentage of women who report they've been impacted by bullying and harassment by superiors has increased from 26% in 2019 to 45% in 2022. Next one, please, Mike. We had a look to see if it made a difference if you have a chronic illness or disability. So when asked if they did, 22% of the people reported that they did have a disability. Of these, 65% said that they had mental health issues. It's perhaps not surprising that the percentage of people within this group who'd been bullied and who considered leaving for mental health reasons is much higher than the average. There's also a higher percentage of people who don't feel safe, who are stressed, and who feel they've been harassed based on power position or who've been pressured regarding authorship. So we're not looking after them very well. And lastly, the next slide, please, Mike. We find that, institutions are not doing what they should be doing about these problems. It's concerning that 74% of them feel that their concerns would not or might not be appropriately acted upon if they were taken to them. And almost 2/3 of them would feel uncomfortable or unsure of speaking out about being bullied for fear of negative consequences. So it's not painting a very pretty picture. On to the next slide, please, Mike. So I presented you with all the misery. So now we look at the other side of the picture, the why do we stay? And we asked them all in an open text question at the end of the survey, and we got 425 answers to the question. And the answer to this question is actually really easy. They stay because they love science and they love being scientists. Next slide, please. So this is the word cloud generated from those 425 answers, and it very clearly supports our view that they're there in their jobs because they love the scientific environment in which they work. Next slide, please, Mike. I actually coded 234 references to love research or love being a scientist. As you can see, 82 of them mentioned love, 82 of them mentioned enjoy, 48 mentioned passion, 44 like. So, why do I tell you this in such detail? Well, it's because to my jaundiced eyes, the institutions take advantage of this love and they get away with treating the ECRs badly because they'll all do just about anything to stay in their chosen field. Next one, please. Not only do they love being scientists, but they love their fellow researchers. They love the people they work with. So here was a nice quote. My colleagues are some of the smartest, most educated people on the planet. So working things out with them is a lot of fun. Next slide, please. And many of them are there because they want to make a difference. They're proud of their work and they're proud that their work will help people. And again, next page. Next slide, rather. And they love the teaching and many of them, most of them love teaching. They love mentoring their students. They love sharing their knowledge and engaging people into their cause. Again, next slide, please, Mike. It's interesting how clearly the love of their freedom and independence at work came out. That was a big thing. Part of this is ability to determine your own research direction, but please, next slide. It's also about flexibility. So this is day-to-day flexibility for use of your time, for choosing your workplace, whether you're going to work at home or at work, and for approach to the work. So these were things that were mentioned often and in conjunction with the freedom to pursue their own research direction. It's a big plus. Next slide, please. There were also, of course, some less good reasons for staying. And the big one is that they don't actually know how, where, or whether to go. Next slide. Somewhat dispiritingly, quite a lot of answers were coded to, I don't know how, I don't know anything else. I don't know where to go. They don't recognize that their education has actually set them up for many fields and really for lots of jobs. And they have little faith in adapting to the world outside and not sure what they would do in it. So that, you know, there's many a person that says, I don't know what else I'm qualified for, or I have no other qualification, as though the qualification that they have is worth nothing, which of course is nonsense. Next slide, please. There's also a strong feeling that they don't want to waste their efforts. That, you know, they put a lot of effort into getting where they've managed to. So his comment one made, after completing an undergraduate, master's and PhD, it's difficult to justify leaving after all that training. And another person said, my family and I have sacrificed so much to be able to have the job I hold. I feel I would be throwing it away if I left. So they feel trapped. Next slide. Industry is not a good option for many. Apart from the fact that there are limited opportunities in industry in Australia compared with, say, the US, quite a lot of people actively don't want to go to industry. It's still regarded by many as being, you know, the dark side. So here was an interesting quote. I've been exposed to a certain culture where academia and industry are two separated worlds, almost enemies. And once you move to the industry, there's no coming back. I don't think it's true, but somehow it's still in my mind. And I must say, in my life experience working in various fields, I have found that again and again. Next slide, please, Mike. It was also interesting to find that taking career advice is a very low priority. So, you know, these people who are saying there's no opportunities elsewhere, and these people who are teetering on the edge of losing their job all the time are not considering the alternative careers that might be available in government or science communication, teaching. You know, there are other ways to skin a cat. So our question, which asked if their institution offers career advisory services, showed that many people don't know if such a service exists, or else know that it doesn't exist. Instead, they're much more likely to rely on people inside academia to ask them about jobs outside academia, even though those people inside academia don't know anything about outside academia. So it's, you know, it doesn't work. A former boss of mine used to say he wanted people with a PhD so there was proof that they could think, count and write. He didn't actually care what field they came from. But this sort of message doesn't seem to be being received by ECRs within academia. Next slide, please, Mike. And for others, it's actually simply about having a job. If they've got a job, it's better than nothing, and they're prepared to sit it out and wait to see what happens. Next slide. So, you know, where are the opportunities here? They want to stay, and we have to think about what we can do to make things better for ECRs and STEM. Mike will talk about this a bit, but sadly we can't fix the funding problems, which is the root cause of all the difficulties. But there are some things that we can do to help ECRs help themselves, aside from the sorts of things that Mike's going to be talking about. Next slide, please, Mike. We had some interesting learnings from the EMCR interviewees, and we learned about the useful steps that they took from their experience. So all these women were still working in academic STEM, and their experiences along the way had been very similar to the survey respondents. All of them had been subjected to the same bullying and harassment, questionable research practices, and inequitable promotion practices, but they'd hung in there. And their learnings were very interesting. So Mike's already put the first one up. They'd taken every opportunity they could for professional and personal development. They'd built up supporting networks, they'd found mentors, and they'd learned to deal with the system. Now they're in a position where they don't have to, quote, deal with assholes. and they just say no to the things that they don't want to do. Many of them mentioned that they'd been lucky, but of course, in doing all these things that I just mentioned, they had, of course, created the potential for their luck. They had benefited for themselves. And so there we are. There's a huge advantage in knowing that people want to stay, and we need to work to create an environment which encourages them to do so, if not in academia, then in science at large. And now we'll continue with Mike's views of the big wide world. And, oh, hang on. No, we don't need to really. Oh, yes, no, we'll do these things. Sorry, Mike, I forgot about this slide. These are some straightforward things we can do, and I'll just do this very quickly. Addressing the workplace culture obviously should be a very high priority. Bullying and harassment and feeling unsafe at work are work health and safety issues, and we need to create safe environments, including environments for the ECRs to report their difficulties, especially difficulties with their supervisors. We need to improve supervision. We don't need to work on fixing the women and the people from different cultures. We need to fix the culture to make it more inclusive. And we need to encourage the STEM culture in academia to be more positive about alternate careers. Moving out of academia can be a good thing and is not necessarily a sign of failure. So sorry about forgetting about that slide. And now we go over to Mike.
Turn on my sound. No, you can hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Good job, Cade. Thanks, everybody. And thanks very much, actually, for inviting both Kate and I to speak. And hello, fellow Australians. I'm now in the US. I wanted to say, as Kate and I have collected and poured over several years of data, we've increasingly come to the view that the problems are reproducible, and that our next major contribution needs to instead be not just identifying these problems again, but identifying recommendations as to how to help the field evolve. So I've included this disclaimer here on the first slide. You know, there's always multiple solutions to any problem, and our proposed solutions might not be the best, but what's critical is that solutions are discussed, scrutinized, and then active efforts made to drive change. Okay, so I've organized this discussion around a table that we've included in a recent journal submission, and I'll go through each item and explain why we feel it's important. The first 4 items include changes we feel that could be made in Australia. The first one, and I suspect it's popular with the research crowd on the other end of the Teams call here, is to increase R&D expenditure in Australia. This data is from 2019, and this is Australia, and this is the OECD average, this red bar here. So in 2019, Australia was lagging behind the rest of its OECD partners in R&D investment. And just to explain, because you're probably wondering why I'm presenting 2019 data, some of the data was not, as far as the OECD is concerned, reported accurately from Australia over the pandemic period, and so these data are lagging. But maybe I understand in New South Wales, the Labour Party won power a couple days ago, and so now the Labour Party is in power in every state and across the nation, except Tasmania. So maybe this is an ideal time to lobby for greater investment into R&D, or into universities at least. Item 2 on our list, and I know this will be controversial, is to consider reducing the number of PhD students. It's my view that Australia is probably training too many PhD students, and I'm concerned that the system is generally encouraging universities to graduate more PhDs rather than necessarily employable PhD graduates. Currently, 50% of block grant funding is awarded to institutes for PhD completions, and so combined with the cheap labor that PhD students provide and the payout of the actual completion, universities are motivated to train more and more students. And we should consider resetting the system and rewarding institutes for producing graduates that are specifically employable. And this might mean that institutes take a little longer to train individual PhDs. Likely they provide broader training that they think it would make the graduates more attractive to industry. And they might also give PhD students, which was something that we always wanted in my lab, a little bit more time so that they can generate higher quality papers that might make them more employable in other academic markets. So finally, I wanted to show you this graph, and every PhD student or prospective PhD student in Australia should see it. The purple line here is the cumulative number of PhD graduates in Australia, and the orange number here, or the orange line here, is the number of academic positions. And so you can see there's a growing disconnect. I think every PhD student should understand the odds are not in their favor of finding an academic position in Australia. And they should consider that as they decide whether they want to enter the academic competitive environment in Australia. The next two suggestions are the introduction of 360 reviews for lab heads as part of the promotion process. Metrics could be lab environment, mentorship, PhD graduate employment outcomes again, and questionable research practices. And this idea was actually based on what Kate observed in her surveys and in her interviews. And the impression she had was that some of the problems reported by ECRs might not have occurred if PhD and ECR feedback was collected by institutes. We also note that there are also many excellent lab heads and that the system needs to improve workload models to allocate more time for the additional investment required if we're going to further improve training outcomes. Our final suggestion is or for Australia at least, is the establishment of an independent office of research integrity. Australia is lagging behind other nations by lacking such oversight, and it's clear that many Australian ECRs do not believe their institutes would even take a complaint seriously. Rather, many ECRs believe they'd suffer negative consequences as a result of making a complaint. And to be honest, I was a little bit surprised recently when the Albanese government indicated that they do not support the establishment of an integrity office. They indicated in their report that they were concerned about the damage public reporting could have on universities' reputations. And I think it'll be critical for all of you to help the government understand that universities are already concerned about their own reputations, and that this is precisely why an independent research integrity office is needed. Next, we focused on international suggestions, and these could be enacted in Australia alone, but it would be ideal if they were enacted internationally. Our number one recommendation is to fund replication studies, and this is what this item in the table discusses. Academic publishing is a unique field in that there's no formal or real audit process. The theory is that the academic literature is self-correcting, but I'm not sure this is true anymore. The challenge is that there are now 3 to 4 million publications per year, and in my mind, any self-correction processes are likely too slow or unreliable. A recent publication in Nature by Michael Park and colleagues, you might have seen the title at least float through your email or on some news sites. They describe what they see as an exponential growth in the volume of new scientific and technical knowledge, but that progress is slowing in several major fields. They argue that the observed declines are unlikely to be driven by changes in the quality of published science, as the patterns hold even when analyses are focused on data from Nature, Science, and PNAS. An alternative explanation is that the data in Nature and Science and PNAS is also similar to the bulk literature and sometimes compromised. I'm quite sure that evidence for this is already available. And in one profile replication study, the authors actually state the reproducibility of published data did not significantly correlate with journal impact factors. So I think that there's legitimate need for this, and now is the time. So we suggest to introduce and fund replication studies. This would likely consume 10 to 20% of research budgets around the world, but it would employ researchers, and it would ensure that the published data is reliable. One way that replication studies could be run, for example, is if you published a paper in 2022 using NHMRC funding, this paper would be entered into a 2023 lottery. Perhaps papers in higher impact journals would be weighted more heavily in the lottery, and if your paper won the lottery, a replication study would be initiated. We believe that many researchers would be pleased to know their work was going to be replicated and would do everything they could to ensure that the replication process was successful. And we also anticipate that some researchers would be less excited to win this lottery, and thus the lottery would be a motivator to improve the quality of academic scientific reporting. Every industry needs some sort of audit process, and this is probably what we need, and probably fairly soon. Our final suggestion, and this sort of is intertwined with the previous suggestions, and there's no reason to not start on this now, is it should be possible to integrate broad training into PhD and ECR programs so that trainees felt that they were better prepared for careers outside of academia. As Kate said, some ECRs stay in research simply because they feel they're not well prepped for a career outside of academia. Fortunately, though, I just recently left, less than 12 months ago, I left Australia, and even at QT, you could see that there was more and more movement towards integrating ideas like this into the programs. So I think this is happening. But personally, the way I see all of these 6 recommendations is just part of an effort to sort of slow down the scientific process a little and focus more on quality. Institutes could recruit fewer PhD students, invest a little bit more time into their training, including a bit broader training, make sure their students and staff actually had time to think, make sure that what they publish is accurate, and then have a plan for staff and students where a long-term academic career is not likely an outcome. I think this is probably overall would lead to a healthier and more productive scientific community. So that's all we have to say. And I thank you for your time and for the opportunity to talk to you. And thanks to Joanne. She's been helping all the way through for the last, it must be 3 or 4 years now. Hey, Kate. And so that's fantastic. And thank you all again. And thanks to the survey respondents and the interviewees.
Thank you, Kate and Mike. That was amazing, a really amazing talk, and I think very effective to sort of hear about the survey and then hear about the potential solutions, because I agree, it's certainly important to highlight issues and to talk about them, but also to do the same for the solutions. So I'm just going to, hang on, someone's going to come in. If anybody has any questions, maybe you can either raise your hand and I'll call on you. I can see that there's some new messages. Here we are. Okay, Adrian, would you like to jump off mute and make a comment?
Sure, thanks so much for that, guys. Yeah, and I've already read your paper, and I think I've already cited it. So yeah, I just find it so frustrating. Authorship, I've seen, authorship being the top problem that leads to so much grief and bullying. And I mean, I think it's because authorship is so important for promotion and funding. And I just find it a bit pathetic, really, that we're stuck on this issue, and it does cause so many problems, and we can't fix this. I mean, any ideas? Should we just rip up the rules of authorship? Because it's
no. Well, I begs jump into this one, Mike. I think that it's become so normal to not obey the Vancouver Convention that nobody cares. It's just people. Most of the authorship things, of course, were people either being put on papers undeservedly or else being left off papers when they should have been on them. And the latter is usually a power play, and the first one is being kind to your friends. But nobody does anything about it. And then they go in and they go to submit their next articles to the, wherever they're submitting it to, and they sign a little thing saying, yes, these people are there because they deserve to be, and it's just not true. I don't have a solution, but I think it's because it's been normalized. Anyway, Mike, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I actually think, and Adrian, you'll have to tell us your thoughts. I think that the rules are a little bit too strict. I personally prefer to be generous rather than stingy with authorship. That's my own bias. I think if you follow the letter of the law, everybody has to contribute to one dot on a graph, and that seems like a bit of a reach. I'd rather be a bit more generous. I mean, I guess for a guy like you, Adrian, you're so productive, you're not worried about papers, but some of us are less productive. But And what do you think, Adrian? What is the solution?
I really don't know. I think it feels like it's the kudos of authorship that causes the problems. People bullying their way to be last author, or bullying their way on the paper when they've done nothing. That's really bad. I mean, that's kind of misconduct. I don't know whether audits would help, but then I think I agree with you, Kate. I mean, you sign those things, and even if somebody came along and audited and said, do you really think these people should be authors? And it'd be very bold of me to say no, because then I'm dobbing in some of my colleagues whose behaviour is terrible.
And I'd like to say that I don't. I agree with Mike about being generous. If it's open to question, it does no harm putting in an extra person. But I think the putting someone on just because, I don't know, just because they're the head of the lab, even if they've actually had nothing at all, genuinely had nothing to do with this project. We were told about that time and time and time again. People who really think that it's just tokenistic authorship, and that's what riles me, as well as being left off.
It's probably worse to leave people off. I would say that's worse. Anyway, that's my view. Adrian, I look forward to your next article on it. I'm sure you'll come up with an answer.
Thanks, Adrian. Amanda, would you like to ask? I think you've put something into the chat.
Yeah, sure. A bit of a different angle, I suppose, but it occurred to me with COVID, there's been a lot of talk about the Great Resignation and so on, and I was just wondering if there's any similar studies into, I forgot, sorry, at the start, did you say this was just STEM ECRs, or if it's arts and so on, and if there's similar studies into other disciplines and also other sectors? Like I've heard a lot about bullying in, with surgeons, for example, construction workers and that kind of thing, and if it's significantly different for STEM ECRs.
I did, so this data is a little bit old now, but during my PhD, I did look at looked at the overall Australian job satisfaction. That was the 80%. Then I looked at academia. So I can't remember the numbers, but the numbers for academics at large were something less than 80%. And then academics in STEM were less than that. And then early career academics in STEM were the bottom of the barrel. It just, so, and that, that data was collected from various places. I haven't really looked in detail at other papers for other disciplines. I think there's plenty of evidence that there are lots of unhappy people in academia, but I don't know in detail.
Thank you. David, would you like to ask your question about recommendations of addressing the gap between academic and industry employment?
No, thanks, Jennifer. I think that's pretty obvious.
Okay.
Basically, there's nothing new in what we're hearing here. What we're hearing is exactly what's been happening for the last few decades. And it's not going to change until people step out of their comfort zone and start to challenge it. And basically it's the bankers who has the money. That's where it comes from. I've been working with industry for many years now, and it's a matter of defending why academia is not a protected workshop. And having been overseas for the last few years and returned to Australia, I hesitate to agree with them that some of the academics I'm at are in a protected workshop. I'm staggered at their lack of engagement with the community and their lack of measurable productivity. So yes, if we're talking about employment in STEM, there is massive opportunity out there. Perhaps what we're not teaching our graduates is how to communicate with people who aren't trained in the same area they are. You know, what do you say after you've said hello? And I'm blown away by the incapability of people to hold a conversation. I do accept COVID has had an impact, but hell, there's lots of other issues, lots of other reasons for this. We're just not focused on the right metrics. We're not focused on the right outcomes. And who cares if you're an author? It's a bit like, who cares if you get a 7 or 100% in your assessment, because next week, nobody cares, nobody will bother. And so the focus is completely misdirected.
Well,
I think it's
sorry, Mike, go for it.
I think it's fair to say that you know, I think it's a recognized deficit within the academic community. We sometimes, well, quite often suffer in our ability to communicate and use the skills that we have learned in academia and apply them to new industry situations. And I think I think everybody knows that that's a problem. And I think you're right. Everyone's known that's been a problem for 20 years, but we're still struggling to figure out how to mend that problem. But if you have solutions, I think that there's plenty of opportunity out there for you to contribute to various university programs, because they'd love to have solutions. I'm sure every university would love to say, 90% of our graduates are employed productively in industry.
Thanks, Mike. I might move to reading the questions from the chat, just because I can see there's a few there and we don't have too much time left. So Victoria has talked about, the difficulties of speaking up at work and whistleblowing to external organisations not yielding results. Is that something, Kate or Mike, you'd like to comment on? I think that's a pretty commonly reported outcome.
It is. I mean, it came up again and again and again in the free text remarks in the survey that there's either no avenue for complaint or there isn't a safe avenue for complaint, and really it just got to happen. David Vo thinks that one way to deal with it as an individual, the things for individuals, and I think this is a very good idea. He thinks that there should be a banner across the top of every university's website that you can press the button and get into some independent institute to start the process of talking to someone who's at arm's length. And I think that'd be marvelous, but it's certainly not very satisfactory now. We, of necessity, our surveys had to be anonymous, but we also, last time round, we collected the institution information, but we had to not even collect the institution information this time to make sure that we got the full stories. So of course we can't link the stories to the institutions. I wish we could, but there's some unsatisfactory workplaces out there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
sorry, Kate. Thinking about the remarks before from David, saying that there's nothing new about the situation. Well, there's nothing new about it. Only it's getting worse. When I first started working in medical research more than 30 years ago, people were whining because the success rate in HMRC was only 33%. You know, now we're down to about 10. It's things are tighter. It's just.
That's really true. When I was showing that graph, I was going to point out when I got on the graph on the timeline, when I was lucky enough to get an ongoing or permanent position, and that was 2010. And the separation between the cumulative PhDs and the number of academic positions was modest at that time. But you know, now the separation is growing because the curve of cumulative number of PhD grads in Australia is almost going straight vertical, you know, and so the separation is growing at a horrific pace every year. And so, you know, kudos to those who are winning academic positions in the current environment or any grant in the current environment. They're truly impressive individuals, you know, and my hat's off to them.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Danny, for putting some links to media pieces that have featured Kate and Mike's work. That's great. I can see a comment from Michelle Brown, who can't jump off mute, and she's talking about, you know, the pressure to have PhD students in terms of this being a benchmark for promotion and the need to have them graduate in a timely fashion. I can attest to that. You know, how do we realistically address this issue?
I think you got to make graduate employment a metric. I think there's going to be increasing pressure on all educational programs around the world to have that as a metric. And, you know, what's the point of training any number of any group of people? You know, it's, of course, there's going to be a few people that are like, I'm doing it for the love. But, you know, as a society, we cannot support thousands of people to get training just for their own personal fulfillment. You know, that we're running universities with some social good and economic good strategy running in the background. And if that economic good is not paying off, then we need to be very careful. And one of the things I worry about is you take these theoretically highly skilled, highly ambitious young people, and you distract them for 4 years, and there's not necessarily a job at the other end. And perhaps they would be better off going straight into industry and trying to, you know, gain some actual hands-on industry skills if that's going to be the end game.
Thanks, Mike. I'll keep going through the comments. I can see that Victoria's starting. She's put her website in here because she's starting some work on employee voice and silence in the early career academic sector. Thank you, Victoria, for that. I have a comment from Kevin. Yeah, again, universities are conflicted because completions are this important source of block funding, and can you see an acceptable solution to universities to that?
Kate, you're on mute.
No, it's the short answer. I mean, they would be very reluctant to change it, but I really like Mike's idea to make them responsible for make the universities more responsible for turning out employable people. But in order to do that, of course, the metrics or the KPIs for the supervisors need to be changed, and so does their work allocation time. I mean, it needs to be recognized that supervising somebody properly takes time and effort, and they need to be rewarded for good supervision. They should be rewarded for mentoring and taking part in all the extra things that a good academic does. But it's not really on their job description. It just and it's certainly not built into their time frame. It's not reason the workload that the supervisors are expected to take on to do the job really well. It's not reasonable, in my view.
So we have a question from Beth Caruana at the Biobank here, asking about, addressing the stigma of industry being the dark side. Maybe this is for Mike. I can also see some further down the chat, somebody's asking for information about his motivations to work in industry.
Well, I think I can tell you a couple of interesting things. For me, a major motivator was it was time for me to come home. I spent 20 years in Australia, and I really, I loved my time there. But my family is all, well, my brother's in New York City, and the rest of my family is in Canada. And so I wanted to come back to North America, and I was fortunate to get the job I got. I feel very lucky. But one of the interesting things is AstraZeneca, and I did another, I won't say who, another interview with a major biotech company here. They're doing so much basic research. It's unbelievable the amount of basic research they're doing. And so I think that the gap between academia and industry is closing. And the only risk with that is it means that the academic machine has to ensure that it maintains some sort of efficiency, or it will industry will outcompete it. And one of the guys that works for me is going next month to a cell therapy meeting, which is all industry people. They're at this point they're not even inviting academics, and so it's a changing time. So the academic
that's very
community
interesting.
needs to, yeah.
We are sort of running out of time, but I can see a good suggestion from Anna, who's I think this is the what they're saying is that, maybe fellowship should really be going to people who don't have these ongoing positions, because I'm certainly aware of people applying for research fellowships when they've already got jobs in the university, and querying whether that's really a way of building career capacity in the system if people who've already got jobs are getting fellowships.
The university will ask you to apply for one, because it'll pay your salary, or sometimes people are motivated so that they can reduce their teaching load, for example. And so, yeah, but I agree though, it's always tough when the strongest candidate wins the ongoing position and then wins the fellowship,
Yeah.
It's not clear if that necessarily benefits the system as a whole.
We haven't published this yet, but we've got a paper coming soon, which was from the interviews of the 12 women who've stayed on. And one of the things that we looked at in there, I told you 12 of them. So they've stayed in there and they've had good careers. They're publishing, they're getting money, they're doing things that successful academics need to do. Two of those who have the best records, track record wise, are still, 5 of them still didn't have an ongoing contract, just even though they've been in there for years and years, and they're still living hand to mouth. And one of them, in fact, the one who had earned the most money, brought the most money into her university, she was on an extension. She was working through her last 3 months, and then after that, she's got nowhere to go. How can we live like that?
It's very tough. And these people, as you say, though, I think we all love science, and yeah, sometimes you need science to love you back, or your career to love you back.
So I was talking to I was at a medical conference in New Zealand yesterday. And I was talking to 3 young things who all of whom don't know what they're going to be doing from the 1st of January next year. It's so hopeless. It's just not a way to look after people.
But I think discussing the solutions is definitely somewhere to start. So thank you so much to both of you for really excellent presentation, and thanks to everybody who attended, and to the many people who put information and comments into the chat. I think this has been one of our most interactive seminars. So we look forward to seeing you in the future at talks, and thanks again. And I think, let's keep working collectively for a better research environment here in Australia.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Have a good day, guys.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.